Hi, my name's Connor Matezis. I'm an agronomy advisor for Sacramento, Solano, and Yolo counties. And I just wanted to talk a little bit today about just giving some feedback because I'm not going to be able to be there at the end of the day for why I would rate some of you the way I would, and just have you a better understanding of kind of what the judging, what I'm looking for as a judge. So let's just break down the four categories. First thing is the knowledge, right, of the subject. Second thing is you're using the right terminology. Third thing is organization and presentation. Organization and presentation are kind of two separate categories, and they're kind of less of those two are less of the bulk. But let's start at the top. The big one is the knowledge of the subject. So what I'm rating you on is how what I can see and so that's why it's really important to kind of show us what you know for that section. And the number one takeaway there is, first thing I would recommend is that you get your order straight in terms of what is the most important thing to look for. And I've got a couple things here that I'll list them from the top, most important things to look forward to, then the least important things to really kind of worry about. And then we'll talk about why these things can be an issue. Number one, noxious weeds. We'll put that's automatically like bottom rank. Noxious weeds, especially something like field bindweed, can be pretty bad for your cropping systems, not only in the wheat but in others. Very competitive, very weedy in many ways, very hard to get rid of. Those are some of the reasons why we would say that. Weeds, just common weeds as well, obviously, pretty bad, as well. Weeds are less of a problem than another crop. So if you have another crop, the nice thing about crops is that, like safflower, for example, not supposed to be in there, kind of a problem, but it's not weedy, right? It doesn't have that same, they're not as competitive because they kind of require that we take care of them. It's a cultivated, domesticated plant. Weeds are not. Weeds are like scrappy. They're from, and then seed quality would be the next one I would put down on the rank, and then chaff or foreign materials. Today I heard a lot of that. I heard a lot of foreign materials being used for all of those things, but there's a clear distinction between noxious weeds, common weeds, or just weeds, you can call them that, other crop seeds, and then seed quality and chaff or some sort of dirt, right? Those sorts of things, I put that in the same category. And so make sure you've got that kind of lined up in terms of what's going to trigger you to be like, okay, that's the most important thing we got to focus on. And the other thing about knowledge is I want you to explain to me why, right? So with noxious weeds, as I mentioned earlier, that's because they're incredibly weedy, they're competitive, they're hard to get rid of, they're often invasive, or they might have herbicide resistance in some cases. There's something about them that makes it really difficult to get rid of, and that's why they're classified as noxious weeds. Weeds, obviously, the reason we want to get rid of them is because they are weedy, they're scrappier, like I said. That's enough of a reason there that it's just going to compete for nutrients, right? Like, show me that you know that. It seems kind of intuitive, but if you don't say it, I don't know you know it, right? That like this is so I want to know kind of why and so what for all these different categories. Other crops, obviously, we don't want safflower in our wheat, just because again it's competing for nutrients. But again, it's not as bad as weeds because and so you can have some other crop in there. We had alfalfa in there as well. Safflower and alfalfa aren't going to be incredibly competitive. Certainly not in the way that other weeds would be, like wild oat, which is what we saw in some of that as well today. Seed quality is something that a lot of people talk about. They talk about luster, they talk about plumpness, they talk about all these things. And those are all important, but all of that typically comes below weeds and other crop seed. Because, and again, all of this can float a little bit. Like if all of your stuff is totally shattered, right? Like that's a problem. If all of your seeds are cracked, that's a problem. If they're all shriveled, that's a problem. But it's, again, it takes all of that. It's all weighted against, other weeds and because cracked wheat isn't necessarily, like wheat will tiller and it can still kind of, if there's a bad seed that goes in, there's probably a good seed next to it, and that'll tiller and kind of fill in that gap. What you don't want is to have weeds filling in that gap. Chaff and inert material is another good word. You could see foreign material. The foreign material is very like, it could be anything, right? Inert material, I know that you're talking about stuff that's not going to grow in the field. It's not going to do anything, right? The problem with that is that it's going to reduce, you're paying for more, right? You're paying for seed that you're not actually getting, because you're going to pay for the weight of that seed, but it's going to be a little, some of that is like straw or chaff or whatever, dirt, and that's not, and it can clog up the machinery and things like that. But again, that's not the most problematic, because you can also clean that, you can work with that, and a lot of equipment can get around that. So let's get it. We'll talk a little bit about terminology. So terminology is very similar to knowledge, right? And actually, I kind of disagree that they're almost like two categories. There's a lot of overlap there. I might give you a little more credit on knowledge if you're not using all the right terms, but I kind of I know what all the logic, the so what is there. I understand that, like, you identified some sort of weed species and you know that it's bindweed, bindweed's really bad, or you don't say noxious, like, okay, like, all right. So I might dock you in terminology for that, but I'll still see that as good in terms of kind of showing the knowledge, right? Especially if you have identified bindweed. So terminology, though, you want to, that's where I'm looking for things that specifically show that you know what you're talking about. Noxious, today, for example, would have been yellow berries, right? We had some berries in there, some of those wheat seeds, some of their berries were yellow in color. They were lighter in color, they were chalky in color, which kind of indicates low protein. Part of the reason we look for luster is because it's the opposite of chalky, and you're going to have slightly, you've got a better chance of having high protein there, which means better germination. Again, bringing the so what is always helpful. Shriveled is another word. Other varieties, in some cases we had red wheat mixed in with the hard white wheat, which is a problem because your contracts at the other end are going to be affected by that. They're going to say, like, why the hell did you just give me a bunch of red wheat and I wanted white wheat? Half of it's red wheat. So the word there would be varieties or other varieties of wheat mixed in. The names of the weeds themselves, like if you wild oat, not just oats, but wild oat, you're able to identify wild oat. And so I know in some of the other ones there was dodder and stuff, but in ours we didn't actually have any dodder, we didn't have any curly dock, we did have bindweed. So I think the names of the weeds themselves would also be pretty important. You don't need the Latin, just the regular name. And again, the names of the noxious weeds itself. Let me emphasize one more time, it's chaff, not sticks, right? So that's another example of terminology that a lot of folks kind of got wrong today, was like inert, they would say foreign material, but I think they were talking about, in some cases we're talking about chaff, but foreign material, like I said, could also be dirt. Again, that's inert material, but foreign material could also be weed seed, which is way different and way more problematic. So that's kind of terminology, especially in today's context, is you're using words like cracked, shriveled, luster, plump for seed quality, right? But then you're also talking about noxious weeds, common weeds, the names of the weeds themselves, perhaps the different types of varieties. If you saw hard red wheat, some sort of variety of hard red wheat, you said the word variety and a hard red and soft or hard white, then I would kind of have an idea, okay, like I understand, they know what they're talking about, they're using the right terms. You can also get terminology points by talking about the effects, right? So when you're talking about showing your knowledge and you're talking about why this would be a problem, you can talk about germination, you can talk about stand establishment, you can talk about just competitiveness in the field. I think, bushel weight, any of those types of things, kind of talking about the greater ramifications of these negative effects on the crop itself that would come about through whatever problems you saw in the seed. As for presentation, there's a couple ways that people typically approach this, and one of them is to kind of like do the soldier barking thing, where I'm like, I am from this FFA chapter, and I ranked the seeds from as according to 3, 2, 4, and 1, and for the following reasons, A, blah, 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 blah. And that's actually fine. I think that is probably the convention, right? So probably good to like work on it that way. With me though, at least, I kind of visualize this as a conversation you're having with a grower, which means you can be casual or you can be soldierly, either way. But the idea is that I want you to be kind of be confident about what you're saying. And part of that confidence is exuded when you talk about why you've ranked them in such and such a way, but also like what those effects would have. You know, again, it kind of links always back to the knowledge itself of like, how much do you know about this stuff and how much do you know about farming, right? Because that's ultimately what we want you guys to be able to do, is talk about farming. So presentation is fine. Like, I'm not gonna like dock people really hard if like their hair's not combed or whatever. Who cares? Like, you know, I don't care so much about that. What I'm talking about is the way you're speaking, the way you're handling yourself. You know, however you want to approach that. If you want to be soldierly about it, I keep saying that, but if you want to be that way, that's fine, because I think that's it's a performance, and this is kind of what you guys are practicing to do here. You're kind of practicing how to perform, how to do things in a certain way. So that's valuable. But I can also say that if you just were to speak to me like I'm a farmer and you're like, hey, look, I would rank these samples accordingly, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And because number 4, we saw a lot of, you know, looks like it's a pretty good sample. There's some shriveling, but it's not that bad. Ultimately, we're going to get good germination out of that. You're not going to waste a lot of money. Number 3, I'd say is the second rank, because, you know, we've got a lot of inert material in there, and specifically we've got chaff. So I don't think it's not, you know, we might have to clean it one more time. And you're also probably paying for a little bit of junk that you don't want. There might be some dirt in there and such. But I think you're going to be okay. Generally, we don't have to worry about like contaminating your field with weeds that we don't want out there. I would put, for number 3, I'd say sample 4, because we did have some other crops in there. There's some safflower and stuff. We can spray that out, you know, if need be, or, you know, it's not going to be very competitive with the wheat. The seed itself, the quality itself was okay. There was some red wheat in there, so depending on what your contracts look like, you know, we're going to need to be a little careful with that. You know, that might not be our best choice. And then if I were to choose the worst one out there, it's going to be the stuff it's going to be number 1, because you've got wild oats, you've got wheat, sorry, wild oats, you've got regular oats, you've got, and then on top of everything, you've got bindweed in there. I mean, I just like wouldn't even touch that stuff, because you're going to plant that in your field, and you're going to have all this, you know, it's not going to be a problem for your wheat, it's going to be a problem for your tomatoes next year, and that bindweed is going to be a beast to get rid of. It's a noxious weed. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And so I just say absolutely not on that one. Otherwise, yeah, the wild oats are also really problematic. They'll compete. And then when you spray your grass herbicides, you're going to have to be a little more limited on what you can do to control the wild oats, because you're going to have to put other stuff in your tank mixtures, or, you know, whatever, to kind of deal with the wild oats so they don't get out of control. So that would be an example there. I would give myself in that one maybe like maybe a 44. I don't know. Some of you guys did even better than I just did. But my point is that's kind of what I'm looking for, right? And part of that is, you know, that's my casual presentation style, which is fine. Again, it's really about the knowledge, and it's about like, do you know what you're talking about? Yeah. So, but I don't know. Let's speak to other judges and get some opinions on that, because I don't know if there's like actual, like a more formal kind of format that things should be done. So do that. Talk to your coaches about that. Organization. Organization, you want to have, yeah, you want the logical order. But the organization really, it's hard to knock people in organization a whole lot. Normally, most people are getting at least a 5, because, you know, like you're just kind of going through it. The main thing with organization is that I can follow what your logic pattern is. I can follow where you're going with it. It helps to have an introduction. It does help to have a conclusion, to kind of just round it out. You're highlighting some of the other things in organization is that you're highlighting some of the main things as you go through there. You can say, like, you can give me like, and the reason why I would say that this one is last is because, and so I'm like paying attention now, right? Or like the biggest reason for this, there are several reasons for this, but the biggest reason is, right? Like those would be some good examples of just helping the judge reminding the judge really of like all the things you're trying to highlight as you're going through there, and which things are more important and which things are less important. So those are just a few of my tips, at least from somebody who's doing, wheat. When we're looking at wheat, that would be some of my feedback as to how we would, if you're doing FFA, like that's what I would be looking for. I know there are going to be other judges out there who have different opinions, and so and really don't be too hard on yourselves. It's judges, you can't control the judges. They're like the weather, right? Like you can't entirely control the judges, but there are some things you can do to kind of work through that. And like I said, the biggest thing for me is that you show what you know and you justify why you're making those decisions. And in going the extra mile in talking briefly about what the implicit effect is for the farmer, I think really nails it. And brings it home, right? Not only is it a noxious weed, but it's going to affect your other rotations. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of. Just saying that it's a noxious weed is a great start, right? And like ranking that way last is a great start. But it's because I know what type of weed it is. I know what it's going to do. And I know it's how it's going to affect your crop, how it's going to affect your bottom line, how it's going to affect your management strategies and things like that. Is anything you can kind of put in there like that really helps. So that's those would be my general recommendations. So thanks for watching, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm currently at Cooperative Extension in Woodland. And again, my name is Connor Matasius. There should be links. I'll try and put links below. Thanks.